Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to my channel. I just want to thank you for taking the time to check in this week. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey, dude, I noticed that you're wearing a hat. You don't usually do that. Well, that's a very astute observation, dear viewer. I don't usually wear a hat. So let me tell you what happened. I went to the skate park for the first time this weekend because I had a birthday and my wife gave me a new skateboard, and it was a board that is smaller. So I had been skating a 9.5 board, and now she got me an 8.5, and it's got smaller wheels and looser trucks. And anyway, it's just totally different than the board that I've been skating. And so instead of, trying to learn how to roll up banks slowly, I decided to start trying to drop into a small pool bowl kind of thing. Small bowl, maybe like an intermediate sized bowl, I don't know. And anyway, I learned that I could go drop in for the most part, but when I roll up the wall, then you got to come back down. So I was practicing on the small beginner's bowl, and I was rolling in, and that was fine, and everything was cool. And then I decided to roll into the bigger bowl, and that was probably 5 or 6 feet down because it was pretty much taller than I was. So I started to go over, and everything was going fine, and then I just kept going, and instead of leaning forward, I started leaning back. And anybody who's done any amount of skateboarding knows that more often than not, if you lean back, bad things are going to happen. So I leaned back, started to go over and hit, and then my glasses went up and got caught underneath my helmet, and they smashed the nose part of the glasses into the top part of my head. So I have a really stupid looking bump. So I'm hiding it underneath this hat, but I'm also telling you the story. So anyway, the point, dear reader, dear viewer, is not to tell you a long story about hurting myself at the skate park. It's to explain why I'm wearing this hat. And also, excuse me, just a little bit of a tangent, having a little bit of fun. So anyway, now that we've got that story out of the way, and I've explained why I'm wearing this hat, I want to talk about music theory. And to do that, I'm going to use this poster over here because I think it's really does a good job of illustrating the point that I want to make about music theory. But before I do that, I got to set it up a little bit. So I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about music theory, like at least the basics. You know that there are different keys that correspond to different letters, and those letters correspond to notes and sounds and everything like that. So I'm going to assume that you know what chords are and what chord progressions are, because I don't know how to explain that well enough to help you there. So my point in saying all this is to say that this is something that I've been using to put chord progressions together for Dude in the Missing Rugs music lately. And you could do it or not. You don't have to. It's just that I've been using this formula to, okay, let me take a step back. Okay. Now, I've been making music for a long time. I started making music when I was 12. I was in a band when I was 12, and I started playing in school band at probably 11. So, and I am 37. So I've been making music for a long time now. And when I was in my 20s and writing songs and doing the singer-songwriter thing, I only used two keys, two chord progression things. And if I would have thought about it and applied it a little bit differently, I probably could have been writing more interesting songs back then. But as it stands now, I'm going to show you what I do for Dude in the Missing Rugs to make the chord progressions that go into the music that ends up being for that project. And hopefully you will find some value from that. And, if not, well, at least you'll find it entertaining, and maybe it'll give you an idea or two. So without any further ado, let's head over to the chart and check out how I like to write songs, or one of the ways that I've been writing songs. All right, now starting down here, you can see that there are
these things, and let me explain what they mean. They mean, like, if you're starting on the top left, it says 1. These are the Roman numerals for 1, 5, 6, and 4. And then you can see there's a handful of others, right? 1, 4, 1, 5 over there next to it. Below that, below the first one is 1, 4, 5, 1. Everybody kind of knows that. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, so you could use these, and I'm going to talk, and specifically I'm going to talk about this. The jazz, the 2, 5, 1, because, pardon me, the 2, 5, 1 is what I've used for the vast majority of the Dude in the Missing Rug stuff, because I like that. It's cool and jazzy. And so, well, what does that mean? Okay, so we come up here. Let's say we want to do the key of G, because I mentioned earlier when I was younger, I wrote all my songs in G. So if I was going to do a 2, 5, 1 in the key of G, that would be A minor, D, and G. And that's a chord progression that I use pretty frequently. Oh, but look, you could plug this into any chord. Let's say you want to do B. Okay? You want to do the key of B, you do C sharp minor, B, you do C sharp minor, F sharp minor, and B. Now, if you started noodling on those, you'd find that that's a Dude in the Missing Rug song or two, because they think the key of B sounds really cool. So, if your verse is C sharp minor, F sharp, B, and you want your chorus to be a fifth above, because fifths always sound good. I mean, almost always, pretty much always. So if you look at the key, the fifth is right below the B. It's the F sharp. So if you were to do 2, 5, 1 in that, then you'd have G sharp minor, C sharp minor, and F sharp minor. And since F sharp minor is the fifth of the key of B, it's no trouble to return to your original chord progression for that. So that's just one way, because sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to write a verse or how to write a chorus relative to a verse. Well, if you're using 2, 5, 1, then anything that is the 5 would naturally fit to be the key of the chorus, because it's a fifth above it and it'll sound good. So, and then you can do that with anything. So if we want to do 1, 4, 5, 1, and we want to look at the key of G again, that would be G, C, D. And anybody who's ever played a song in the key of G goes, oh, wow, okay, well, that makes sense. And then look at C, C, F, G. Again, no great shocker there. But if you want to apply the same idea of C, F, and G, and you want your chorus to be a fifth above it, well, look at that. G is the fifth above C, which is the final note of that. So it'd be really easy to turn around and go G, C, D, and then you're right back to... and then just, you're there again. So that is a really quick nutshell way of how I write songs. And then I really, in particular, it's the 2, 5, 1. But you could use any of these chord progressions. And if you like blues, you could use this. And just plug it in. Plug it in with either the major key or the minor key. And go to town. And that's, in a nutshell, how I've been writing, in terms of music theory, most of the music from Dude in the Missing Rugs. Now, it doesn't always apply. Sometimes feel takes over and I do it like that. But 2, 5, 1, plug it into this chart, and Bob's your uncle. You got yourself a tune or two, or an infinite loop of them.
Alrighty then, so that ends it for this week. I hope that you found those tips useful and at least interesting, and maybe it'll jog your, it'll, set you off on the right path of figuring out new ways to do music, or, maybe make it a little bit more mathematical or formulaic, or at least help you to have some new ideas, because I know I often struggle with coming up with the basic ideas, and using those ideas of the 2, 5, 1, and just use them to write bass lines. And then once you write a bass line, you aren't necessarily married to those chords. I mean, depending on what you're doing, you could. One thing that I sometimes like to do, and I learned this from Krungbin, is you could just make the bass, put the bass in a certain key, right? Your 2, 5, 1, and then put your guitar a third above it. or a fifth above it. And artificially, it'll begin to create chords just by the virtue of the interplay between the notes of the guitar and the bass. And if you think about building songs that way, like sort of like almost like sonic stacking, just like, getting down a basic idea with the bass, and as simple or as complicated as you like. I tend to make my bass lines more complicated than maybe I should, because I think that if you keep the bass line simple, you can let everything else get more complicated. But you set up a bass line using a 2-5-1 and some cool chords, and then noodle and shred a little bit in some keys that are like, you could even, you could shred all in one key. You could pick whatever is the fifth, because you know that the fifth is going to be good for both the verse and the chorus if you write the songs the way that I had talked about. So if you just noodled everything, if you just write your whole solo in just whatever is the fifth of that key, then it'll always sound good, and it won't matter whether or not it's the chorus or the verse. You really even have to pay attention to that. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I'm saying that you can't. If you want to write like that. And I think that there's really some magic to just like putting it out there and not like, listen to it once, try to, get some ideas, some riffs and licks that you think are cool, and then just record it. You don't, it doesn't always have to be super complicated. You don't always have to be shredding over chord changes. You can just like play in one key and just have fun. And the other thing that I found that makes a really big difference for me is like just playing with attitude, right? So if I'm writing a line, if I'm laying down a line and I'm thinking like, if I start to feel nasty or I start to like get a bad attitude or like curl my lip a little bit and start like rocking my head back and forth, just lean into it. And like, you can't underestimate the value of feel. And even if you play the wrong note, it's all about what you play next. Because of the famous story, I saw a TikTok about it. The famous story of, I don't remember, I think it was Miles Davis was playing with somebody, maybe Herbie Hancock, and I don't remember exactly. I'm messing up the names, but they hit the wrong note, but then they waited to see what the note after that was, because they just thought that there's no way that they would make a mistake that bad. It had to be something that was planned out. So, just like I did a second ago, if you have a misstep and you start to, misspeak or do something wrong, it doesn't mean that the whole performance is messed up. You can come back from it, and like in Nirvana's Unplugged, or I mean really anytime that they played live, most of the time that they played live, like they make mistakes. And I don't like to listen to music that feels overproduced. And maybe I'm one of the only people that likes things to be imperfect and enjoys the chaos that comes from just like live recording and making music more by feel than by formula, right? Outside of, obviously there's a formula to building the chord progressions and like how I like build out the tracks. But I don't want it to be too planned out, because then I feel like it takes away a bit of the charm. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. And then next week, I'm going to keep up the music video. I'm going to keep up the theme of talking about music production next weekend. And in that video, I'm going to talk about how I build a track from beginning to end, because I think that might be interesting for some people. And hopefully it is. And if not, that's cool too. Either way, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for checking out the video. And if you like it and you want to see more, you can go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you want to see me on TikTok, that's where I make the most content the most frequently. I would recommend going and checking me out over there. Thanks for your time. Have a great day. Cheers.